Let's study the nervous system part 2. 17. A client has suffered damage to the thalamus as a result of a stroke. The client would exhibit deficits with what neurological function? A. Relaying motor impulses from the cortex to the spinal cord. B. Coordinating voluntary movement. C. Conveying information about sensations to the cerebrum. D. Regulating emotions. Answer C. Conveying information about sensations to the cerebrum. The thalamus sends direct information into the cerebrum to transfer sensations such as cold, heat, pain, touch, and muscle sense. Motor fibers from the cortex cross to the other side of the spinal cord before emerging to interact with peripheral effectors. In this way, motor stimuli coming from the right side of the brain affect motor activity on the left side of the body. The thalamus does not regulate emotions or coordinate movement. 18. A client's nerves have been stimulated and the signal has reached the axon. How will communication continue? A. Through the production of an electrical signal. B. By the release of a neurotransmitter. C. By physically stimulating the nerve on the other side of the synapse. D. The nerve signal will cease at this point. Answer B. By the release of a neurotransmitter. The transmission of information between two nerves or between a nerve and a gland or muscle is chemical, achieved by the release of a neurotransmitter. Communication is not electrical or physical, and communication does not necessarily cease at the axon. 19. A nurse is reviewing the function of the forebrain before assessing a client on the neurological unit. The nurse should identify what functions of this part of the brain. Select all that apply. A. Coordination of speech and communication. B. Learning. C. Housing of the extrapyramidal motor system. D. Housing the cranial nerves. E. Containing the swallowing center. Answer A, B, C. Coordination of speech and communication, learning, and housing of the extrapyramidal motor system. The forebrain is made up of two cerebral hemispheres joined together by the corpus callosum. The two hemispheres contain the sensory and motor neurons. It also contains areas that coordinate speech and communication and is thought to be where learning takes place. Cranial nerves emerge from the hindbrain, which is where the swallowing center is located as well. 20. The nurse is describing the structure and function of the two hemispheres of the brain to a recent graduate. The question arises, what regulatory function should the nurse describe? A. The regulation of the electrical conduction system of the brain. B. The regulation of the afferent conduction system. C. The regulation of the efferent conduction system. D. The regulation of communication between sensory and motor neurons. The correct answer is D. The regulation of communication between sensory and motor neurons. The cerebral cortex consists of two hemispheres, which regulate the communication between sensory and motor neurons, and are the sites of thinking and learning. The regulatory functions of the hemispheres do not focus on electrical, afferent, or efferent conduction. 21. A client's dysphagia has been attributed to damage to the client's swallowing center. This client has dysfunction in what part of the brain? A. The hindbrain. B. The right hemisphere. C. The forebrain. D. The left hemisphere. The answer is A. The hindbrain. The pons and medulla oblongata are in the hindbrain and control basic, vital functions such as the respiratory centers, which control breathing. The cardiovascular centers, which regulate blood pressure. The chemoreceptor trigger zone and emetic zone, which control vomiting. And the swallowing center, which coordinates the complex swallowing reflex. 22. What hormone or hormones provide the required energy to the nerves? Select all that apply. A. Dopamine. B. Oxygen. C. Potassium. D. Acetylcholine. E. Serotonin. F. Glucose. The correct answers are B and F, oxygen and glucose. Nerves require energy, that is, oxygen and glucose, and the correct balance of the electrolytes sodium and potassium to maintain normal action potentials and transmit information into and out of the nervous system. Energy required by the nerves is not provided by dopamine, potassium, acetylcholine, or serotonin. 23. The nurse is preparing to provide health education to a client. The client's learning will take place in what brain region? Is it the area that coordinates sensation, the area that coordinates movement, the areas that coordinate speech and communication, or the areas that communicate between motor and sensory neurons? The answer is C, the areas that coordinate speech and communication. The forebrain is made up of two cerebral hemispheres that contain areas that coordinate speech and communication, and are thought to be the area where learning takes place. The forebrain does not coordinate sensation or movement or communicate between the sensory and motor systems. 24. What client is likely to be experiencing a heightened ability to learn? A. A client who gave birth 12 hours ago. B. A client who is experiencing extreme anxiety. C. A client who has slept for the past 11 hours and recently awoken. D. A client who is thrilled to hear of a good prognosis. The answer is A. A client who gave birth 12 hours ago. Oxytocin and mild stress act to increase actual learning. Childbirth is the only time that oxytocin levels increase, and this phenomenon is not clearly understood. Extreme anxiety, excitement, and prolonged sleep do not increase learning. 25. The sensory nerves enter the brain and react with related nerves to cause a reaction. What mediates this reaction? A. Muscles or glands. B. The limbic system. C. The cerebral cortex. Or D. Neurotransmitters. The answer is A. Muscles or glands. The sensory nerves that enter the brain react with related motor nerves to cause a reaction mediated by muscles or glands. The motor impulses that leave the cortex are further regulated or coordinated by the pyramidal system, which coordinates voluntary movement, and the extrapyramidal system, which coordinates unconscious motor activity that regulates control of position and posture. Therefore, the other options are incorrect. A client is diagnosed with a neurologic disorder that affects the structure and function of the myelin sheath and Schwann cells. What effect will this client likely experience? A. Slower than normal nerve conduction. B. Personality changes. C. Chronic pain. Or D. Lack of coordination. The answer is A. Slower than normal nerve conduction. Myelinated nerves have Schwann cells, which speed up nerve conduction. Their absence does not cause personality changes, pain, or lack of coordination. 27. A client who nearly drowned is brought to the emergency department. The paramedics tell the nurse that the client was anoxic for approximately 5 minutes. Because of this anoxia, what might happen to the nerve cells? A. The nerves may repolarize too quickly. B. The nerves might not be able to depolarize. C. The nerves might not be able to maintain the sodium-potassium pump. D. The nerves may release inappropriate neurotransmitters. The answer is C. The nerves might not be able to maintain the sodium-potassium pump. If a person has anoxia or hypoglycemia, the nerves might not be able to maintain the sodium-potassium pump, and with continued lack of oxygen and/or glucose, the nerve cell will die. It will not repolarize too quickly, be unable to depolarize or release inappropriate neurotransmitters. 28. What is the purpose of the myelin sheath? A. Protects the nerve from damage. B. Speeds electrical conduction. C. Produces Schwann cells. D. Secretes neurotransmitters. The answer is B. Speeds electrical conduction. Long nerves are myelinated. They have a myelin sheath that speeds electrical conduction and protects the nerves from the fatigue that results from frequent formation of action potentials, not from damage. Although myelin sheaths have Schwann cells, they do not produce these cells, and the myelin sheath does not secrete neurotransmitters. 29. The client is diagnosed with myasthenia gravis, a condition in which antibodies block, alter, or destroy the receptors for acetylcholine. What symptom would the nurse expect this client to display? A. Muscle dysfunction. B. Seizures. C. Depression. D. Coma. The answer is A. Muscle dysfunction. Acetylcholine communicates between nerves and muscles, so inability of this neurotransmitter to function properly whether blocking, altering, or destroying the receptors, would result in muscle dysfunction but not coma. Inadequate gamma-aminobutyric acid would result in seizures. Serotonin is important in preventing depression. The nurse is caring for a client diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor. The client asks the nurse why the tumor is being treated with radiation instead of chemotherapy. The nurse's explanation involves what important information? A. Medications have difficulty crossing the blood-brain barrier. B. Neurons in the brain are easily damaged by chemotherapy. C. Tumors arising from nervous tissue are not impacted by chemotherapy. D. Chemotherapy reduces nerve transmission and cannot be used. The answer is A. Medications have difficulty crossing the blood-brain barrier. The blood-brain barrier is a functioning boundary that plays a defensive role by keeping toxins, proteins, and other large structures out of the brain and preventing their contact with the sensitive and fragile neurons. As a result, medications like chemotherapy can have difficulty crossing this barrier to reach the tumor. The other answers are neither true nor the correct option. 31. The nurse is caring for a client whose recent ultrasound of the carotids diagnosed a 90% occlusion of the right carotid artery and a 92% occlusion of the left carotid artery. The client asks the nurse, "If one of these arteries becomes completely occluded, will I have a stroke?" What is the nurse's best response? A. A common vessel receiving all blood to the head called the circle of Willis will distribute blood from other arteries to the brain as needed. B. A stroke is caused by lack of blood supply to a part of the brain, so if your right carotid artery becomes blocked, you'll have a stroke on the right side of your brain. C. It is hard to predict exactly what will happen, so you'll have to wait until your provider sees you, because only the provider can answer that question. D. With only 10% of the blood needed getting through your right artery and 8% through your left artery, you could have a stroke now. The answer is A. A common vessel receiving all blood to the head called the circle of Willis will distribute blood from other arteries to the brain as needed. All the arteries that supply blood to the head deliver blood to a common vessel at the bottom of the brain called the circle of Willis, which distributes the blood to the brain when it is needed. The role of the circle of Willis becomes apparent when someone has an occluded carotid artery. Although the passage of blood through one of the carotid arteries may be negligible, the areas of the brain on that side will still have a full blood supply because of the blood sent to those areas through the circle of Willis. All other options are incorrect. The nurse is caring for a client whose emotions often swing from one extreme to the other. The client's spouse tells the nurse these mood swings started when the client awoke from a coma following a serious head trauma. What area of the brain does the nurse suspect was damaged? A. Limbic system. B. Forebrain. C. Hindbrain. D. Cerebellum. The answer is A. Limbic system. Stimulation of the limbic system, which appears to be responsible for the expression of emotions, may lead to anger, pleasure, motivation, and stress. The forebrain is where thinking and coordination of sensory and motor activity occur. The hindbrain controls vital functions and arousal. The cerebellum controls motor functions that regulate balance. 33. What component is vital to the regeneration of a nerve? Select all that apply. A. Soma. B. Dendrite. C. Axon hillock. D. Axon E. Ganglia. The answer is A and C, soma and axon hillock. Although nerves do not reproduce, they can regenerate injured parts if the soma and axon hillock remain intact. It is currently thought that neurons are unable to reproduce, so if nerves are destroyed, they are lost. If dendrites and axons are lost, nerves regenerate those structures. However, for this regeneration to occur, the soma and the axon hillock must remain intact. A ganglia is a group of nerve bodies. 34. What components serves to protect the brain from injury? Select all that apply. A. Bony structure. B. A secondary nerve network. C. The circle of Willis. D. Specialized muscular system. E. Meninges. The answer is A, C, and E, bony structure, the circle of Willis, and meninges. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, which are protected by bone and meninges. To ensure blood flow to the brain if a vessel should become damaged, the brain also has a protective blood supply, moderated by the circle of Willis. There is no secondary nerve network or specialized muscular system for the purpose of protecting the brain.